Hello and welcome to the F1 Time Portal, a Formula One history podcast started by two friends who love Formula One. I'm your host, Rosa.
And I'm your locomotion host, Luigi. And today we're taking you back to the 1962 season. So let's go. So, Rosa, we're up to 62.
Hey.
We've just come off a very dominant 1961 Ferrari season. So I wonder what this year holds for us.
That was very much a lot of fun. I loved 1961.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see if Ferrari can back it up like Cooper did, right? Cooper dominated 59 and 60.
Yep.
So the Ferrari's 1962 development program was hit with a major stumbling block.
Oh, that's not a good start.
No. I wanted to set you up, Cooper, back to back. Can Ferrari do it?
Oh,
Computer says no.
No.
Yeah. With most of Enzo Ferrari's top technicians and team manager, Romola Tavoni, walked out of the team after a major disagreement with Enzo Ferrari.
Yeah, well, you did tell me to do a bit of research on this, so I knew it wasn't going to be a Ferrari big year. But yeah, there's a very interesting story here, and I have to say, it was really actually difficult to find information on this event, so I might not be entirely accurate because I did end up getting it off of Wikipedia. But I mean, the story of the walkout is everywhere, but the reason for it was difficult to find. But what I did find was at the time, Enzo had been allowing his wife, Laura, a bit of a bigger say in the company's day-to-day operations, which, I might add, is actually quite progressive of Enzo back in the 60s.
Yeah, nepotism a bit, but okay, yeah, let's keep going.
So apparently 8 of his quite high-ranking employees, so like management and chief engineers, including Carlo Citti and Giotto Bizzarini, and the sporting director who you just mentioned, Romolo Tavoni, were concerned about her interference in their duties.
I reckon there may have been a bit of sexism there perhaps as well.
I think so. So they staged a walkout and hired a lawyer to write on their behalf.
Yeah.
But Enzo got the letter from the lawyer and then personally terminated them from Ferrari, accusing,
Yeah.
And he accused them of attempting to start their own company, like their own constructors outfit.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like a mutiny.
It is, yeah. Well, the event is known by quite a few emotive names, including the Great Walkout, the Palace Revolt, and Ferrari's Night of the Long Knives.
Wow, I love those dramatic terms, and I like how they hired a lawyer to write on their behalf.
I know.
That just shows the relationship was not good.
No.
They didn't just confront him and talk about it. They must have done that first, right?
They must have, yeah. And to think they could, pull one over Enzo, who did they think they were?
I know. And I mean, this is just, you don't hear about this from other teams, do you?
No, it's very Ferrari, very dramatic.
Yeah. And to me, obviously I think there's two things happening. Obviously there's nepotism, which is fine sometimes.
Well, I mean, if
cases.
she had the skills and the interest and the passion, why not?
But I'll make a bet her being a female was most of the problem, not the fact that it was his wife.
Exactly, yeah.
There's my gut feeling.
Me
I have
too.
no basis for it at all.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, I couldn't find much further information on it. That's all I was able to find.
Yeah, and no doubt Ferrari whitewashed it like they did the other incident that they had.
Yes.
Remember, you couldn't find anything on it, and it was like, how could this be such a big deal, but there's no information about it?
Yeah, exactly.
So Ferrari spent millions cleaning the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, this also shows how what happens behind the scenes really does impact the front pointy end of the team, which is their competitiveness on the track.
Yes.
Because I don't think we're doing much of a spoiler, but Ferrari are not what they were in 61.
No.
And it has to be associated with this. There's no other big material change.
Yeah. And
that, does that.
And again, I don't think I'm going to be spoiling anything because of the timing of this episode coming out and being published. But, in 2024, Red Bull also experienced some behind the scenes kind of political power struggles within their company, and everyone really was concerned that it was going to affect their on track competitiveness and performance. So I mean, we haven't seen it quite yet, but these things have a big ripple effect through organisations, I think.
Yeah, it's a good example of culture.
Yes,
culture impact
yes,
and things like that. Yeah. Okay, so this season is going to be a little bit different in some respects because there's a lot of these side chats this year because a lot of things happen. And to be honest, most of it not good. So we're not having these side chats to have a good time, unfortunately. And you'll see why later. So the dominant 1961 Tipo 156 was modified in detail only. And so basically it did not perform anywhere near as well as it did in 61. So much so that a lighter and improved chassis was launched at the German Grand Prix, but the performance was poor, and Ferrari actually withdrew their cars after the Italian race.
Oh, that's sad. I actually think, having seen pictures of the 1961 Tipo 156, they got rid of the shark nose design. I think it disappeared from this year's version. So, it is sad. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it actually did much from an aerodynamic perspective.
Yeah, probably not, but it looked awesome.
It did look awesome, and that's the end of back to boring Ferraris. Not that any Ferrari F1 car or any F1 car at this era was boring.
No,
comparatively
boring. Absolutely.
Yeah. So on the other hand, BRM, which didn't do particularly well in 61, had undergone considerable development of their own V8 engine, and it was now capable of 190 brake horsepower. So it gave 190 did I say 180? I meant 190 brake horsepower with Lucas fuel injection, but only 183 brake horsepower with carburetors. So that's actually the engine they gave to their privateers. So they made sure they had the superior one, right?
What, did they also give it to their customer teams?
That's what I mean. That is the privateers.
Right, the privateers.
Yeah.
Oh, that is classic. I mean, I guess why not? If you've got the edge, why would you want your competitors to have it at the same time?
Yeah. Well, what the funny thing is, I think in the mid-2010s, there was a time when Ferrari was giving their engines to some of the second-rate teams, like the Saubers and teams like that, but they gave them a one-year-old Ferrari engine. So that's an even more dramatic version than this.
That is dramatic, yes.
Yeah. So basically, to the BRM team, their chassis was improved. So it was a lighter, more compact car with less frontal area. So BRM really made great efforts to improve their car.
Oh, so finally Graham Hill may be getting a strong car to compete in this season. You got to remember, he started in F1 in 1958 at Team Lotus, actually as a mechanic, and he talked his way into the cockpit, which is very formidable. But during those years, it was Cooper who was up there and challenging the Italian team. So he didn't really have that much success. Then he switched to BRM in 1960, but it was still Cooper and Ferrari dominating, as we've said. So I wonder if he's now made the right move to go to BRM. The timing might be right.
Yeah, I remember you saying back then that Colin Chapman in Lotus, when Graham Hill was driving for Lotus, he was trying to make him join the engineering side.
Yes.
And he pushed to be the driver and threatened to leave the team.
That's right.
His career changed dramatically from that. So, yeah, it's an interesting move, and let's see how this goes for him. So, to Colin Chapman's team, Lotus, they continued to use the Coventry Climax engine, but they were now using the V8 version, which was not particularly reliable in 61, but it's obviously had some more development and attention. So both engines in the key British players of BRM and Lotus were able to produce 190 brake horsepower. So they were up there. However, the Lotus was to introduce a major innovation, the use of a monocoque chassis.
Ah, the monocoque. Now, how much have we heard about this?
Yeah, so we're not a technical podcast, but we have to explain some of the basics. And I admit openly, I'm not a technical person either. So this is a summary of it. The new chassis was formed by two long boxes of riveted aluminium sheets transversely braced by steel bulkheads.
That sounds very technical, Luigi.
It does sound technical, so I'm going to paint a picture in a different way. This design is based on aircraft design, and it resulted in a car that was much more rigid and lighter, and also gave easier access to the engines. That's the main thing to know.
Okay. I also read that because it was more rigid, it allowed for softer suspension to be used, which just made the car stronger in those slower corners.
Yeah, interesting. So now we have a fast car that is also fast around slow corners. So this new layout also meant that the driver was in more of a reclined position in a tighter fitting cockpit with a smaller steering wheel.
Oh, that's the first time we've heard of that too. So, I think the traditional front engine cars had drivers reclined at about only 20 degrees, and the Lotus 21, which was last year's car, increased that to 50 degrees, and this car, the Lotus 25, went even further than that. So that's a huge progression.
It's a big change, isn't it?
Yeah.
And, they're not sitting down in their car anymore, are they?
No.
Yeah. So remember when we saw, I think Rose and I, you and I had a look at the W196 and the seat in that car.
Yes.
It was almost just like a normal seat.
It was like a lounge
at
chair.
A picnic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a lounge chair. It even had, what was that pattern that you described?
Like a tartan.
Tartan.
Yeah.
Tartan seat material, which reflected the type of seat that it was.
Yes, yeah.
So, yeah, big changes, right? And these are looking a lot more like the modern Formula One cars, right? Yeah. So Jim Clark, who'd been driving for Lotus since 1960, said that the new driving position of the Lotus 25 took some getting used to, and that the new worm's eye view of the track required him to pick out new marker points as he got used to seeing the front wheels in his view. It also gave him a lot of neck stiffness as his chin rested on his chest, but he got used to it. But once he got used to it, he wondered how he had driven any other way.
Oh, wow. Okay. So revolutionary, but needed a bit of getting used to. And you're right, it is sounding so much like what we know as the current Formula One car. So it all started with Colin Chapman, the legend, back here. Like, I think I also read that he was making sketches on restaurant napkins for quite some time before settling on that aluminium that they use in the aircraft construction and applying it to the F1. So he was really a thinker. Like, he was way ahead of his time.
Yeah, that's really impressive.
So did he provide this new revolutionary chassis to his customer teams?
Well, apparently he said he would, but actually no. And they were very shocked to see this new car on its debut at Zandvoort, especially because Chapman himself had promised that their cars would be mechanically identical to the works Lotus, but his get out was that Team Lotus retained the right to bodywork modifications.
Nice. I like it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, he's playing a game, but hey, it's
a
competitive
competition.
world, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the new chassis innovation from Chapman would literally be the start, somewhat of a standard setting of chassis design until pretty much carbon fiber chassis came about in the mid-1980s. So we'll talk about that at that time, but that's a different, it's a significant step up from what this is, but this was a significant step up from what was before.
Yeah.
So Cooper also developed their new car, but were nowhere near the Lotus team, and they had a lighter and smaller chassis frame. Porsche continued to represent German pride and launched an 8-cylinder engine capable of producing 185 brake horsepower, so pretty much up there with with BRM and Lotus. Unfortunately, at the end of the 1962 season, Porsche decided to withdraw from Formula One and instead focus on sports car racing.
And another one bites the dust. Like, how many times have we heard about this? And I think we've said it before. I think we said it in the last podcast on 1961. But, Enzo Ferrari having arguments with his drivers, sacking his whole technical team, strategy blunders. He's still sticking at it. Like, they haven't left F1. He's not dipping in and out. He's there. So you got to say something about that, I think.
Yeah, despite sacking his his leadership team, his entire leadership team.
Yeah.
And they're still turning up. So, yeah. So, of great excitement, we have two new teams entering F1 for the first time. So, we welcome Lola, and Brabham. So we start with the Yeoman Credit Team, which is that one of those two teams, Rosa?
Well, no. So no, they're not. Oh well, I think they end up becoming. Keep going because I think Yeoman was a Lotus team that took on sponsorship, didn't it?
Like took the Lotus chassis.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So they'd been joined by Bowmaker to create Bowmaker Yeoman Racing. So their names are getting a bit silly. Not too far off some 2024 team names like that. Kick, Strike, whatever weird team. That basically is, what was that? That was the Sauber team.
Yes.
Which was the Alfa Romeo team.
Yes.
Anyway, and which will become the Audi team. So this team was managed by Reg Parnell, a name we'll hear a lot more about in the future, and they commissioned the development of a new Formula One team called Lola.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. That name is just awesome for a Formula One team, and so much better, like you say, than some of the marketing-driven ones we see today.
Yeah. So this car was to be the lightest and smallest car on the grid, despite being the old multi-tubular space frame chassis. And it was powered also by the V8 Coventry Climax engine.
And they signed two British drivers, John Surtees, who we've heard about, and Roy Salvadori.
Yeah. So they've got some pretty decent drivers there, by the way, because remember, John Surtees did a great job in his debut. So Brabham went out on his own as he became frustrated with the resistance of Owen Racing to developing their cars. So he and his Australian friend and fellow driver Ron Tornak started their own manufacturing company, which would eventually become Brabham Racing Organisation.
That's not surprising. He was very progressive, Brabham, and very innovative. And as a qualified engineer, I remember that he had a major role in many of the car designs and developments at Cooper. So, and he would have been so frustrated with his 1961 season. Like, I think he only scored 4 points after being a double champion.
Yeah, that must have been a very bitter pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And he also didn't help by taking off to try to do Indy and other things.
That's true.
But still, when he was there, he wasn't competitive.
No.
Except a couple of times, I think he qualified in the front row in 61, but not much more than that in terms of results. So,
well, he only got 4 points for the whole year.
Yeah. So his new car was built around, this is the new Brabham, was built around a conventional chassis using a Coventry Climax V8 engine, and the car was designed by Ron Tornak and coined the BT3, with B for Brabham, standing for B, and T for Tornak. However, their car would not be ready until the German Grand Prix, so Brabham raced the Lotus 24 in the early part of the season.
Was it just him in the team, Louis?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So with Brabham leaving Cooper, that meant McLaren was promoted to the team leader at Cooper.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think he was joined by Tony Maggs as the number 2 driver.
Yeah, okay. So there was also a great deal of reorganisation amongst the other team. So Centro Sud withdrew, which meant that Bandini was released from his contract. So Bandini joined Ferrari in place of Ginther, who had left to join BRM.
Gosh, this is a silly season. So, but I think Ferrari kept Phil Hill and Baghetti from last season. And I think Rodriguez also debuted for them last season. So, yeah, they've kept all of those 3 driving for them.
Yeah, and let's not forget Rodriguez was super young.
Yeah.
20.
Yeah.
So Team Lotus, meanwhile, signed Taylor to replace Ireland, who had left to join the UDT Laystyle team. Gee, I don't like that name.
No. See, Lola is so much better.
I know, yeah.
So before we start to get into the championship, we do have to talk about a big event that took place before the season started. So Sterling Moss's career came to a very abrupt end. He had crashed during the Easter Goodwood meeting. So I think, it was a non-championship race meet. The reason for the crash still remains a mystery to this day. No one knows what happened. He can't explain it, nothing. But it was a major, major accident. The Lotus was wrecked and Moss sustained appalling injuries, like really bad. I won't go into them because it's quite confronting, but he recovered. I I think it says that he fully recovered, but his racing career was over and he announced his retirement from the sport. I have read actually, and I've seen mention in a number of resources that he was due to drive for Ferrari for this season, had it not been for this accident. Yeah.
That would have been not great move.
No, given where Ferrari is at this time.
I mean, at the time when if he signed up with them, he would have been signing up for the team that just dominated 61.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it would have been a bad career move for him, I think. But it's also interesting because, Moss was really a British car racer, wasn't he? So it was interesting that he signed for Ferrari, but, it never happened.
Yeah. So we're going to commemorate some of Moss's career now because he doesn't race in 62, of course, because of that accident. But as we've said before, he's known as one of the greatest drivers to never win a championship. And as we've seen throughout our podcast, he came very close. But bad luck was his main competitor, as well as his sportsmanship. He challenged Fangio, as we all know, an all-time great, over many years and actually finished runner-up to him 2 times. And he pushed Hawthorn and Brabham in their championship years as well.
I think he was quoted as saying, like, much later after his retirement, a lot of people spoke to him and interviewed him. And he, in reference to the, horrific season of 1958, I think that was the year of the deaths of Musso and Collins on the track. And, probably the year that he was...
there were more.
Yeah, there was probably more. That was probably the year he was closest to taking out the championship.
Yeah, I mean, and that year Hawthorn won only one race that season.
Yeah,
and Moss had 4 wins.
Yeah,
but still lost the championship by 1 point. Not only for bad luck and retirements, but also helping overturn Hawthorn's disqualification in one of the races.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So he said, and I quote, "Until that year, winning the championship meant everything to me, but after that, it lost meaning. I still wanted to win it, of course, but it didn't matter that much. And looking back, I'm glad in a way that I didn't win it, not just once anyway. Some pretty average drivers have won it once." Whoa! I'd rather be remembered.
Who's he pointing at? Who's he?
I don't know when he said this, so I don't know. I'd rather.
He's basically dissing on everyone.
That's won one championship.
Everyone but Ascari and Fangio.
Yeah,
I think that's who he's dissing. Oh no, and Brabham had won it twice.
Yeah,
so he's cutting Brabham out. Yeah.
Yeah. So then he said, "I'd rather be remembered as the guy who should have won but never did."
Yeah. Enzo Ferrari, I found that really fascinating because that 58 season was traumatic just to review it, let alone live it.
Been in it, yep.
Yeah. So Enzo Ferrari placed him alongside pre-war ace Tazio Nuvolari as men who on any kind of machine, in any circumstance and over any kind of course risked everything to win and in the ultimate analysis appeared to stand out among the rest. They knew how to get the best, whether out of a saloon car, a sports 2-seater, or a single-seat racing car. So that's a pretty massive comment from Enzo, considering Moss never drove for him.
Yeah, that is...
Which I think indicates why he was about to drive for him in 62.
Yeah. I mean, Enzo doesn't hand out that kind of praise very easily, does he?
Yeah. So some Moss statistics. I'll just name a few points, but because we could keep going.
I know.
And this is not a Moss commemoration podcast, but he was worth commemorating. So in a 7-year career from 55 to 61, Moss finished in second place 4 times in the championship and third place 3 times. He entered 67 races, started 66, and he actually won 16. So that's 24%. So that's 1 in 4 races he won. Now, in my mind, I'm remembering him retiring 2 out of every 4 races.
Yes.
And 36% of the time he got on the podium.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, he got 16 pole positions and 19 fastest laps. He famously quoted, and I think, Rosie, you mentioned this in one of the podcasts earlier, "It is better to lose honourably in a British car than to win in a foreign one."
That is so classic.
He did drive in foreign cars.
He did eventually, yeah.
And some of the things that I found very interesting was that his record of number of wins was only beaten by another British driver in 1991 when Mansell finally passed him, which is, I think, amazing that it stood that long.
Yes.
And in terms of highlights from my perspective, I just felt his wins at Monaco in 1960 and again in 61 in what were not competitive cars were his highlights. And the thing that's really impressive is they were at the end of his career. It's not like they were at the beginning. And he was only 32 when this horrific accident ended his career. So he was really young. He had a lot more to give, and we really missed out on seeing that.
And look, he ended up giving a lot back to the sport. He had many roles for the sport right up until I think he passed away in April 2020. So, he gave back a lot in that time since his retirement as well.
Yeah. So,
okay.
He lived to a ripe old age.
Yes, that is.
So, and that's more than can be said for many others.
That's right.
Of his contemporaries. So to the racing, hey? Without Moss.
I know.
We're going to miss him.
I'm going to miss him.
A lot. Yeah. So we're at the Dutch Grand Prix. It's the 20th of May. This is race 1 of 9. It's at Zandvoort, 80 laps. There's 20 drivers in this race, and the grid formation is a 3x2x3. The most interesting entrant to this race was the Lotus 25 for Clark to debut, which we just talked about in detail. And not only did this car look quite different to the others, as we described, but it was also super fast on debut, setting the second fastest time, with Graham Hill in the BRM the only driver to go faster. And his time was 1 second faster. But this was expected because BRM had done a lot of testing at this track in advance.
Okay, well, things are looking promising for Graham Hill and BRM then. And apparently they're coming off a great win over Jim Clark in a non-championship race at Silverstone just prior to this. So they're on a bit of a high.
That's good. So when it came to the third and final practice session, there was even more of a surprise. Quite unexpectedly, Surtees grabbed pole position with a blistering time of 1 minute 32.5 in the Lola climax.
Oh, the Lola. That's impressive. Race debut, getting pole position.
That's extremely impressive. It doesn't happen very often. No. It has happened. It actually has happened in the after this event in the 70s that I can recall off the top of my head. But that's why I remember it, because it was impressive then. And it's impressive now.
Yep.
The same level of impressiveness. So apparently Graham Hill and others tried very hard to displace Lola. They probably thought, how can this be?
Yeah.
I'll fix that up, but they couldn't. But rain in the late afternoon stopped all attempts. So the qualifying result was Surtees on pole in the Lola, followed by Graham Hill in the BRM, Clark in the Lotus, Brabham in the Lotus. Remember, he's borrowing that Lotus. Not borrowing,
his car's not ready. He's using it.
He's a privateer as a customer. And McLaren is next in the Cooper.
Yeah, it's going to get confusing. There's a lot of Lotus customer teams out there, but they're different teams. But it's going to sound like you're referring to the same team.
Yeah, well, Clark is driving for Team Lotus and Brabham is driving a borrowed Lotus.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so we'll do our best. But at the end of the day, they're driving a Lotus. They're both driving a Lotus car.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though
there's different
Lotus
teams.
So what is funny that when I apply my future lens, I see it even worse because Surtees and Hill also create their own teams in the future.
Gosh.
So for me, I've got to really put in my mind where they are now, where they are in the future.
Yeah, I don't want to delve too deeply into your mind, Luigi.
No,
it's a scary place.
Yeah, I'm scared of it too. So the Ferraris having dominated 61, and I even remember saying, I just haven't seen such consistent front rows for a long time. They qualified 9th with Phil Hill, and the rest, Rodriguez and Baghetti, were way back.
Well, there's going to be one less hill to worry about in this race at least, possibly for the whole season, unfortunately.
we still will have to say P and G because they're still on the track.
Yeah.
Yeah, so don't think we're going to get away with it totally. So at race start, Clark made a great start to lead into the Tarzan hairpin from G Hill. Gurney, who qualified 8th in the Porsche, snuck up into 3rd place, which is pretty impressive. By lap 3, these first 3 started to pull away from 4th place Surtees. However, Surtees wasn't having his own way, as Ireland, McLaren, Phil Hill, see I had to say it, and others were all tightly bunched up together. So pretty tight there. In this pack, Rodriguez spun and was not only stuck in the sand, losing over 2 laps, but also damaged Brabham's Lotus, which caused his retirement. So Graham Hill now had taken over the lead and Clark was forced to stop with some clutch trouble.
Oh, that Lotus 25 hasn't had the greatest of debuts. Clark must still be getting used to seeing the track from the viewpoint of a worm.
Yeah, I like that term, a worm.
A worm.
Although he did say he loved it afterwards,
It did, yeah.
Yeah. So Gurney also had to retire after the gear lever on his Porsche had come out of its socket. So this left McLaren in second place, followed by Ireland. By lap 20, G Hill increased his lead in the BRM ahead of McLaren to about 11 seconds. But then on lap 22, McLaren in the Cooper, his gearbox broke, leaving Graham Hill over 25 seconds ahead of Phil Hill in the Ferrari.
He's back.
Look at that.
Phil Hill's back. Good.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad he's back. But what is it in this era with the gearboxes, the clutches, the transmission? They are really taking the limelight from some of these drivers.
Yeah, it's like these cars are just driving beyond the limits of those gearboxes, but they're still doing it anyway.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So now that Graham Hill has a 25-second lead over Phil Hill, he consistently pushed and increased his lead. Taylor in the Lotus team was giving the race some on-track action. He had qualified 10th but was sitting in 4th and caught and passed Ireland for 3rd. He then set about pulling in Phil Hill, who was 10 seconds up the road from him. So slowly but surely, Taylor in the Lotus reeled in the 61 world champion, and it took him until lap 62 to finally get the move done and to move into second place.
No shark nose, no grunt.
Yeah,
See?
and this is an 80 lap race, remember? So lap 62, he grabbed second.
Poor Phil.
So maybe they should have kept that little shark nose.
They should have.
Just because it looked cool.
Yeah.
So while Taylor was now up into second place, he was nearly 30 seconds behind Graham Hill, and he could make a real impression on the flying. And he could make. Sorry, did I misread this? Yeah. He couldn't make a real impression on the flying BRM, I think.
Yep.
If anything, Taylor was lucky to still be in second, as while he was trying to lap Ginther in the other BRM, the two cars touched. So while Ginther spun off in the sand, Taylor continued without damage. So let's say he dodged a bit of a bullet there, perhaps.
Yeah.
So the final results are Graham Hill wins, quite easily it seems, in the BRM, followed by Taylor in the Lotus. Phil Hill getting up on the podium in the Ferrari, not realising quite yet that Ferrari's not that great.
Yeah.
And Baghetti got 4th in the Ferrari as well, so pretty good effort.
Well, maybe all is not lost for the Ferrari this season. That's good.
Yeah.
And this is the first win for Graham Hill and only the second win for BRM since the first one in 1959 by Bonnier.
Yeah.
That's huge.
That is huge. And what's interesting is it gives me flashbacks of 59, because in 59, Brabham won the first race of the year in the Cooper.
That's
right.
and
that was his debut win.
Yes.
And then he went on to win the championship. So I wonder if that's the case here. I'm not giving anything away. I'm just talking about a coincidence.
I know that you know, so I'm just going to not ask you. Okay, so the championship standings after the first race are Graham Hill on 9 points, Trevor Taylor on 6 points, Phil Hill on 4 points. And in the constructors, we've got BRM on 9, the Lotus Climax on 6, and Ferrari on 4.
Yeah. Okay, so we're off to race 2, the Monaco Grand Prix. This is the second race, second out of 9. This race is on the 3rd of June at Monte Carlo. 100 laps, 16 drivers in the race with 22 drivers trying to qualify. And as we know, the Monaco organisers choose to ignore the fact that their race has a very high retirement rate. So from 1960, I can't remember how many finished in 61, but let's see how this goes this year. The grid was a 3x2x3. So again, Monaco decided to allow 2 entries from each of the 5 works teams, which left 6 places for the remaining 11 drivers. And interestingly, no concession was given to previous winners, including Brabham and Trintignant.
Like all these local rules, they do keep things interesting, I guess, but they kind of disadvantage some teams and drivers sometimes. Like, I wonder when the FIA step in and put a stop to all this local stuff. Because, I mean, we definitely don't see it now, do we?
No, we don't. And I think that ended when the Concord Agreement came about in the 80s. I think so. In between now and the 80s, we're going to have
lots of local rules.
Creative rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it does keep things interesting. It's not too bad.
It does.
Yeah.
And like I said in the last season's podcast, it gives us the opportunity for the teams to reveal who is their number one driver and causes angst between the drivers because they're being exposed. Like, you know, you're driving for your life here, driver B, but driver A, you can go as slow as you like, you're fine.
You're fine, yes. And sometimes it was literally for their life.
Yeah, as it turns out. So on Thursday, Brabham and Surtees on the outer were forced to qualify, but both did do so with comfort. So Friday was a washout. So the final 90-minute session on Saturday was frantic, as you can imagine, all the drivers wanting to get into that top 16 position, as well as qualify as best they can. So Graham Hill set a time of 1 minute 35.8 and looked set for pole until Clark landed at 1 minute 35.4 towards the very end to take pole. McLaren in the Cooper and Marisi in the Ferrari were next up.
So Clark got pole by a whole second from third. That must have been an amazing lap. And also, Louis, that is his first pole of his career.
That's a very interesting call out because it's a record that he will keep for a long time until a certain other driver takes it. That's also a big name. So the starting flag was dropped by legendary historical racer Louis Chiron.
So he's very interesting. He's worth mentioning. He's a Monegasque driver and he's the only Monegasque driver to win the Monaco Grand Prix in 1931, so way before the championship started. And in 1958, he became the oldest driver to enter a Formula One race at 58. 58.
Yeah.
That is wild to think about.
I just like the fact that it was 58
and he was 58. Yeah. He was the only Monegasque driver to score points in a Formula One race until Charles Leclerc in 2018 Azerbaijan Grand Prix, and the only Monegasque driver to score a podium until, again, Charles Leclerc did it in the 2019 Bahrain Grand Prix.
I always find these stats interesting when it's this far old.
Yeah.
And it only gets exceeded in current day.
I know. So, I mean,
it shows. I don't know how many Monegasque drivers there have been.
I was going to say,
honest. I don't think there's been many.
There's not been many. I mean, as iconic as Monaco is and that track is, there's probably the population's quite small, isn't it? It's only a tiny little municipality, so it's not that surprising. But yeah, it is a very long-standing record. I mean, given the iconic nature of motor racing, you'd think there'd be more drivers coming out of it.
Yeah, you'd think so. To the race?
Yes, back to the race.
Marisi. Am I saying it right? Mares in the Ferrari.
I think you should just pick one and stick to it.
I just struggle with his name. That's the real reason. Mayor. I'm going to call him Mayor.
No, don't call him Mayor. No, do not call him Mayor.
Marisi in the Ferrari, who qualified fourth, literally scraped his way between Clark and Hill and took the lead. Now, this is Monaco, remember, so that's pretty impressive and powerful to have the lead. However, he left his braking too late and spun pretty quickly. So McLaren in the Cooper and Hill in the BRM were quick to take advantage of this situation. Clark was unfortunately blocked by this whole spinning situation along with the rest of the field. Then the throttle stuck down on Ginther's BRM and he then hit Trintignant's Lotus, who then spun into Ireland's Lotus and then Gurney's Porsche. So Ginther and Trintignant were out and Ireland and Gurney raced for the pits where Gurney would retire. Okay,
so someone caused like a 4-car pile-up just then.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it
Yeah,
was.
look-
Was it Maurice? I think it was was
Maurice.
Maurice. Yeah.
I'll go with your name. And because of this drama that he caused, you know how I like to give drivers that have good starts high TP rankings in our.
Yes.
He loses at this one. He doesn't get a pat on the back for it because.
Well, he had the lead too. Like if you're leading at Monaco, that's a surefire win. Surely.
He must have been so excited.
Yeah.
So there's more to come though.
Okay.
Because later on the opening lap, and yes, this is still the opening lap, Maurice spun again.
Oh.
So he's definitely not getting my TP points. Although he might get it for spinning twice on the opening lap. Just not giving up.
Yeah,
keep being himself.
Yes.
Yeah. And this time he only impacted himself, luckily, and he found himself down in 11th position. So in the land of the normal, we had McLaren in the Cooper leading, followed by G Hill in the BRM, P Hill in the Ferrari, and the rest. So McLaren held the lead for 6 laps, but then on lap 7, G Hill pushed his way past and started to pull away. Further back, Brabham and Clark, both in Lotuses, had moved into 4th and 5th place, and things were starting to settle until...
Oh gosh, I knew that was coming. As soon as things start to settle, something happens.
Yeah, Phil Hill. So at this stage, Ferrari's sort of up
I
there,
know.
but not up there. If you know what
surprised.
I mean?
Yeah.
Phil Hill spun on the harbour front, and both Brabham and Clark flew past. Lap 22, Clark, tired of sitting on Brabham's tail, slipped past into 3rd place, and he began to close up on McLaren's 2nd place Cooper. Within 5 laps, Clark had closed the 7-second gap to McLaren, who he duly and promptly passed. So Clark was now 8 seconds behind race leader Graham Hill in the BRM. So by lap 45, only a second separated Clark and G Hill. So this is a really impressive recovery drive from Clark since he got blocked by Maurice.
Yes, and Trintignant. Yeah. And talk about getting used to that reclining Lotus. He's setting a blistering place now.
Yeah, big time. So then Graham Hill started to open up his lead again as Clark was having trouble lapping the other cars. In particular, Bandini and Surtees, who were battling it out for 6th place. Now, Bandini, I believe, was in the Ferrari.
Yes, he was. Yep.
And Surtees was in that awesome
Lola.
that got
The Lola.
pole. Yeah. Pole of the other race. Then on lap 56, Clark had difficulty selecting gears and he ground to a halt. No clutch.
Oh, no. I was hoping that Lotus would finish this race. Maybe Taylor will bring his home.
Maybe. So Graham Hill now had a 48-second lead on McLaren in the Cooper, with Brabham in the Lotus and Phil Hill being the only other drivers on the same lap as the race leader. So it really had paced out at this stage. By lap 78, this is a 100-lap race, remember? Graham Hill's position was looking dubious as his oil pressure was dropping and his engine was smoking. 10 laps to go. Graham Hill still had a 25-second lead, but he could not nurse his car much longer, as on lap 93, the BRM engine finally stopped, and that was that.
Oh, no. 7 laps he had to go.
Yeah.
Who's the lucky second-place driver then?
Well, as we've said in the past, if you're in second place, you're in the de facto lead.
Exactly.
So
You've got just as much. Actually, you've probably got more chance of winning the race than the person in the lead.
Yeah, because if you're in the lead, you're going to be retired. That's the way it goes.
Yeah.
So when I say this, I'm not being disparaging towards Bruce McLaren because it was McLaren who now took over the lead. I feel like I've heard that a few times, but he's not a driver that just sat in second place. Don't get me wrong.
No.
But he happened to be second place here.
In this race, yeah.
So despite a major effort by Phil Hill in the closing stages, Phil Hill obviously was charging at McLaren trying to take this win. Bruce McLaren went on to win by 1.3 seconds. So Bandini was third, followed by Surtees and the Lola. So this win was clearly and really Clark's.
Yeah.
But then it was clearly and really Graham Hill's.
Yes.
The interesting thing is that Graham Hill would go on to have the nickname of Mr. Monaco because of his win record at this track. And this is one he didn't even win.
Yes.
So it shows whatever record he got for Monaco, which was
still
really impressive. Still to come, and it could have been even better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was definitely a race for who was third place in the end. Okay, so after this race, the championship standings are Graham Hill and Phil Hill are both on 10 points. Bruce McLaren's on 9 and Trevor Taylor is on 6. And in the Constructors' Championship, we've got Cooper Climax on 11. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? BRM on 10 with Ferrari also on 10 and the Lotus Climax on 6. And I'm going to mention it, Lola. Lola's got 3 points. Go, Lola.
Yeah, it's look, I just think it's awesome they got pole position. I'm probably going to give a TP point for that. for 2 races ago, not this one.
Okay, well, I think we're going to close out the pod now because this is a pretty long season. So we're going to chunk it up a little bit. So we'll see you all back for the next part.
Yeah, see you next episode, guys.
Okay, bye. We have a Patreon.
Yay, we're a professional podcast now. So it means a lot to us if you are able to support the F1 Time Portal podcast.
For a small monthly fee, you not only get ad-free podcast content, you will also receive special episodes that are exclusively uploaded for our Patreon financial supporters.
We promise at least 2 additional exclusive episodes each month aligned to the decade we are up to in the show.
And you will also be able to make suggestions about any special episodes you may want us to research and present. We can't promise that we can do all of them, but we will consider them.
So, if that sounds like an entertainment bargain to you, go and sign up at patreon.com/F1 Time Portal today.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please tell your friends and non-F1 friends alike.
Yeah, and don't forget to rate us 5 stars or whatever highest is available on the podcast platform that you use.
We have a range of social media handles for you to connect with fellow listeners, so look up F1 Time Portal on all the usual platforms.
Or visit us at www.f1timeportal.com or email us at f1timeportal@gmail.com.
We would like to give credit to our primary reference materials, a series of books called Grand Prix by Mike Lang.
We also use many other written and digital references, which are in our show notes.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.